What's going on, guys? I'm your host, Jason Grubbs, and this is the Do Not Diminish podcast, the show where we tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. What if I told you that there was a system in place meant to destroy you, and one of the main weapons is your food? Let's talk about the things we eat. This is episode 19. Let's dive on in. Welcome to episode 19 of the Do Not Diminish podcast. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the things that we eat. Now, if you remember weeks back on episode 10, we did an episode called Fit for a Kingdom, and we talked about exercise and how having a healthy body can really impact our ability to serve the kingdom of God well in a positive way. And this is just another part of the equation, which is our diet and the things that we eat, because that obviously also has a huge impact on our physical health. And a little bit later on this season, or maybe on the next season, we're going to do a podcast on how to take care of our bodies when we're sick. So we're going to be talking about things like pharmaceutical drugs, vaccines, and things like that as well. That also have an effect, and we're going to be talking about whether those things are good for us, bad for us, or indifferent. Because if you put those three things together, the type of medicine that we use, the exercise that we get, in the diet, those things pretty much equate to how our physical wellness and our physical well-being is doing, which then impacts our ability, our spiritual ability, and our mental and emotional ability as well. So all of those things kind of fit together, and they're all highly important into how we function as Christians. And obviously we don't have complete control over all those aspects. Even if we do everything right, we are in the flesh. It is a sin corrupted body that we're living in, so it's going to deteriorate and break down no matter what. But what we want to do is we want to maximize what we have, maximize what we've been given, and stretch it out as far as it can go so that we can do as much for the kingdom of God as we can before it's our time to go and be with the Lord. And that way we can impact the kingdom of God and have the greatest impact because we were able to use every little ounce that we had. So as mature Christians, we want to make those smart decisions. A lot of times those hard decisions that don't pay off in the moment, but pay off in the long run. And so today we're going to be talking about the dietary aspect of that. And our diets are super important. And a lot more people are figuring that out nowadays. Science is helping in a lot of ways, but we're seeing the results of us not paying attention to it. Before 1990, there were 0 states that had higher than a 20% obesity rate. Now, there are 0 states that have less than a 20% obesity rate. So our diets have effectively gotten extremely worse. There's a lot of fake stuff and a lot of scientific stuff that's been put in our food in an effort to make things cheaper and more profitable for the companies that make them and addictive to their consumers like us. But it's not good for our bodies. So we want to talk about that today. And I know it's something that's a little bit difficult, at least for me. Like I like certain types of fast food and things like that, and certain types of junk food. I can binge on that all day long. But it is something that I have to examine myself with and say, okay, I know I want that, but is it good for me? Is that what's best for me right now? So let's have those difficult conversations right now. And for those of you who don't really think about your diet, maybe this will open up your eyes to something that you should pay more attention to. All right, let's dive on in. So the first point I'd like to cover is our diets are so important that God actually specified them in the book of Leviticus when he was giving his law to his people. And a lot of us like to skip over Leviticus because there's a lot of things that we would consider boring, right? Rules, do this, don't do that. But there's a wealth of knowledge in the book of Leviticus that I would encourage you, if you haven't ever gone through it, to go through it, get through those parts that we would consider tough, and ask God what he might be showing us through those scriptures, because there's a lot of wisdom that we can take out of it, and God obviously put it there for a reason. It's more than just historical information for us to read, right? There is a reason, and a lot of the Levitical law has to do with diet. Now, why would God include rules about diet in the law for his people? Well, there are several reasons, and one of them is to keep them safe and healthy, right? If God is going to bless his people and he's going to use them to be a blessing to the rest of the world, for the rest of the world to get to know God through them, then they would need to be around and they would need to be in good health and able to deliver that message and be in a good type of health and shape that other people would see them and actually want what they have, right? That only makes logical sense. And God also loves his people, so he's only going to want the best for them. So those rules that God put in place for their diet were meant so that they would be in good health and have no disease and things like that being transferred among them. And so we have the benefit today of also looking back through the lens of understanding more about medical science than they did back then. And so we can even see even more of what God was doing in his genius and in his infinite wisdom and setting up for them. All the animals that he was calling, that he declared were unclean for them to not eat, those are all the animals that easily transmit disease to humans and are not that healthy for us to consume. And so if we kind of just follow that, we would have a much better diet in and of itself already. But we don't really follow that today, especially in a lot of our cultures. And so we don't really reap those benefits. But God is not, he never says anything for no reason, and he never wastes words. And so if he's telling us something, if he's telling his people something, then that means there's a reason behind it, and we would be wise to pay attention to that. I'll give you guys one example from the book of Leviticus, chapter 3, verse 17, and it says, "This shall be a perpetual statute throughout your generations in all your dwellings. You shall eat neither fat nor blood." So nowadays, we know the downsides of high-fat diets, right? It's linked to different types of heart disease, coronary blockages, and things like that. It's not good for you to eat a lot of fat. And so God was already telling them thousands of years ago, don't eat the fat that comes with the meat. So that's just one example. There are several others where God was setting them up to eat good food that was healthy for their bodies. And what we need to do today is we really have to pay attention to the food that we're consuming. We can't just eat it, and we can't even just take the word for it when they put those labels like, oh, this is organic and things like that on it, because sometimes that can be just marketing and they can be lying. We have to actually look at the ingredients and look at what's included in these foods. And when we see something that we don't recognize, then look it up so that you know what it is, because a lot of the stuff of these chemical compounds that they use either for flavorings or for preservatives, and they don't really work well with our bodies because they're not naturally found in nature. So we really have to pay attention to these things. And I know it can be a lot of work, especially at first. At first, it's going to be overwhelming because a lot of the products that we're used to consuming is highly processed. And since it's so highly processed, it by nature is going to come with all these artificial chemicals, because that's the nature of processing things, right? They're applying different chemicals to change the compound, change the nature, make it last longer, make it more addictive with the flavoring so that your body craves it. Those are all the types of things that we're used to if we're eating a lot of processed foods. And the reason why we eat a lot of processed foods is because they're more convenient. They last a long time on the shelf. We can pop them in the microwave, or we can eat them directly out of the package really quickly. There's no preparation. And so it's easy for us to eat and on the go. And usually they're also cheaper. Most of the time they're cheaper as well. So those things all contribute to us being attracted to them and eating them. And then once we start that process, we get hooked and it's hard to come off. But what I'm going to challenge you to do is pay attention to what you're eating, read the labels, read the ingredients to know what's in there, and then do some research on the things that you don't know in that ingredient list, and then decide, is this a good thing for my body or not? And pray on it as well, because God will give you the guidance and the wisdom that you need. Now, in general, it is hard to avoid a lot of this stuff because that's mostly what our stores are stocked with. And if you want to go for more healthier food, it's going to cost you more money. But I would also say my counter argument to that is it's either going to cost you more money up front eating the healthier food now, or it's going to cost you more money later with bad health and going to the hospital and having all these medical bills. So you get to pick which one you want to pay on. It's unfortunate that the good food is expensive. That is horrible. But there's really not much that we can do about it. In what we got going on as far as our politicians and things like that. I personally don't have much confidence in that changing. And we'll probably have some future episodes on politics as we get closer to the elections in the US, because I definitely have a lot to say there, and I definitely think it's an arena that us as Christians, we've kind of fallen back from for too long, because it's very messy. Nobody likes it. Me personally, I hate politics. But I do recognize where we need to take a stand and draw that line for the things that God says are okay and things he says are not okay. And so if we got to go somewhere we don't like that's uncomfortable, then we just got to do it. But back to the diet aspect. So pay attention to what you're actually eating. And then, as best as possible, try to get things that are as natural, as organic, or as, I would say, close to how God intended them as possible. Again, if you actually really deep dive into this, you'll see it's a lot harder to do unless you just grow the stuff on your own. And so that's actually another way that you can eat healthier is if you have the space, and even if you don't have an outdoor like a front yard or a backyard, there are ways to grow plants inside your house as well. So try to grow as much as you can of your own produce, tomatoes and herbs and spices and things like that. If you're able to do that, that's actually the best. But I know not everybody's in a living situation like that or has the time to do that. So if you don't, then try to find a way to get that type of food whatever way you can. Maybe going to farmers markets instead of the grocery store, looking up different sources of where you can order it online. Those may be ways that you can find that food. And then as much as possible, cook it on your own. If you cook it, you know exactly what went into it, you know exactly how it was prepared. And so it's obviously going to be a lot healthier than if you're getting fast food or going to a restaurant all the time, unless you know that restaurant has really high standards. But that is one of the best ways to make sure that your diet stays good, is that you have control over what's in it and you're not just eating random products without knowing what you're taking into your body. And we're all gonna want those treats and that junk food, and that's okay every once in a while. You know, as long as you don't go overboard with it and you're able to stay disciplined, then okay, you can have a donut or whatever every once in a while, unless you have some certain dietary restriction that makes it really bad for you. But my main point in this section is just know and be aware of what you're putting into your body. Don't be ignorant of it and don't take people's word for it. Do research for yourself so that you know what you're eating and that you know what works best with you. Now, in the introduction, I talked about a system that was meant to destroy you, and one of those weapons is food. Now, what did I mean by that? Because some people may ask, well, why is the food so bad? Why are there so many artificial chemicals and things like that in it? Like, why aren't we just eating natural food? Well, the main reason behind that is money. A lot of the products that we consume, the overwhelming majority of the food that we consume, they're owned by only a few different corporations that own all these other corporations, corporations like Pepsi and things like that. They are all profit driven. And whatever they can do to get more money is what they're gonna do, regardless of the impacts that it has on our health. So if they can substitute natural sugar for high fructose corn syrup, because high fructose corn syrup is a lot cheaper to produce and it's a lot more addictive than natural sugar, then guess what they're gonna do? They're gonna do that. And so that's kind of where it started, and it's just grown more and more and more. As they get more advanced and they learn how to make different types of chemicals and they can substitute natural things for artificial things that are cheaper, that's what they're gonna do. Because their ultimate goal is to make money, and they don't really care what the long-term effects are on people's bodies. And then there are other industries that profit off of, well, now you got all these unhealthy people, so now I'm gonna feed them all these drugs and sell them all these drugs and make even more money off of that. And those two things, they kind of feed each other. It's a self-licking ice cream cone. And so that, we're gonna talk about, like I said, we're gonna talk about the pharmaceutical industry stuff on a later pod, but those things work together to keep us in this state where we're just constantly being abused by the system and just giving up our money and losing our health at the same time. And so this is another reason why Jesus said that for the love of money is the root of all evil, because people will do all kind of stuff to get more money without a care in the world who they're hurting or what kind of destructive things they're doing to get it. And so that's why the food is so bad, because these companies can make a lot more money with this trash food than they can selling us actual regular real food. And so it's up to us, because they're not going to stop. They're not going to regulate themselves. Definitely don't count on the government to regulate them. So it's up to us to be smart about what we spend our money on and what we buy and what we put into our bodies. Because we're the ones that are ultimately responsible, not them. They might be doing wrong, but we're the ones responsible for knowing what we're eating and what it's doing to us. So lastly, to close this episode, I also want to talk about how this can affect us in our service for the kingdom of God. So similar to how we talked about with exercise, the things that you eat can also affect your mood and things like that as well. I personally, I'm learning to love to run. I used to not like running at all. And now I'm at the point where I still don't like it when I think of the thought like, okay, I gotta go run right now. But once I'm actually running, and then especially once I'm done, then it feels good and I love it. It's like, oh, I enjoyed that. But the thought of going doesn't make me feel like that, if that makes sense. I still kind of lazy in that regard. But I notice a big difference. If I have a lighter, healthier lunch, like say I have like a poke bowl, which is like, if you don't know what that is, it's kind of like a raw fish and some vegetables and some rice. Pretty light, tasty for me at least, lunch that fills me up, gives me the right amount of protein and nutrition, and then I can go out and run and I feel light as a feather when I'm running. Contrast that to the days when I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna get some Taco Bell really quick, I'm gonna eat that, and then I'm gonna go on my workout later. I can still get through the workout and do it, but I'm way slower. I feel way more sluggish, and I feel heavier running it. And I've actually timed myself, and like over a 3-mile run, there's like a 4-minute difference between the light, healthier lunch and the Taco Bell lunch. So obviously your food, the things that we eat, it has a direct correlation on our physical bodies and our performance when it comes to exercise and things like that. And so that is going to impact your ability to serve. So if you, let's say you're supposed to serve in, I don't know, in homeless ministry one day, right? And you eat a horrible lunch, and then you got to go out that evening and serve. Are you going to be that enthusiastic when it comes to greeting people, talking to them, asking them how their day was, figuring out what they need, praying for them? You might be able to tough it out and push through, but think about how much more like spunkier and energetic you could be and loving you could be, because you'd have more energy if you ate a healthier, lighter, more nutritious lunch. You see, we don't often think about that opportunity cost that gets lost when we eat junk food, but it is there because it will affect your mood. There are even foods that can give you greater chances of having anxiety, that can feed those anxious thoughts, and things like that as well. And we know this, there's tons of research that's been done. So if we know that, then why wouldn't we want to avoid those things? Because who wants to walk around filled with anxiety all the time? I personally can't stand that feeling, and it's hard to fight off as well. Anxiety is one of the toughest emotions to fight off. So I'm gonna try to take every advantage I can to not feel that. So whatever foods I might be eating that might be triggering that, and that means I need to let those foods go so that I can be in a more stable frame of mind all the time. So I really want us to think about that, because our diet is important and it is something that we can use to serve God better. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31, Paul says, "Therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God." So we can definitely have a diet whose whole sole purpose and intention is for us to glorify God more. And guaranteed, God will bless us for that. It reminds me of Daniel when he and the other Israelites were captured and taken into Babylon, and they were trying to feed them the Babylonian food and make them presentable to the Babylonian king. And Daniel's like, hey, we can't be eating this kind of stuff that you guys are eating. Let me and my friends just eat these things, and then we'll see what we look like at the end of the time compared to the other slaves that you guys have brought in. And sure enough, they agreed to let him do it. And Daniel and his friends looked all better and healthier, and they were healthier and stronger than the other slaves who were eating all this fancy stuff from the king. So that goes to show you God will bless you when you're doing things in accordance with his word, and to seek to give him glory and to stay clean with the things that he said are clean. And so that same thing will apply to us today. I don't believe that God is holding us to the Levitical diet, but I do believe that God will bless us if we were to follow it. And I'm not talking about following it in a like self-righteous, I'm holier than you because I'm doing the Levitical law diet type thing. No, I'm talking about it in, hey God, I know who you are, and I know that you created man, and you know what's best for man's body, and these are the things that you instructed your people to eat. So I'm gonna eat those things because I know that'll bring me good health, and it'll put me in a better position to honor you. And actually, in studying for this podcast today and looking through that, I think I want to commit to doing at least 3 weeks of trying to purely diet by the Levitical law, just to see what happens. I want to say that same prayer to God and mean it in my heart and see if God will bless me with it. and be like, okay, yeah, I think this is legit, because I know it is, but I would love to see, because I've never done it fully. I've tried to avoid certain things, but I've never committed to doing it fully, and just seeing what God might want to do through that. So if anybody wants to join me in that, let me know in the comments below, or send me a text or send me a message, and I'll let you guys know what date I decide to start that on, and we can all maybe do it together. But until then, I hope you guys have a blessed week, and I'll see you next time. Peace.